One of St. John Henry Newman's great prayers was about what's called some definite service, and this is how it reads. God has created me for some definite service. He has committed some work to me that he has committed to no one else. I have my mission. Somehow I am necessary for his purposes, as necessary in my place as an archangel is in his. I have a part in his great work. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. If I do but keep his commandments and serve him in my calling. God has created me, us, you, for some definite purpose. And what is that purpose? What are we created for? Who am I? Now, for many years, I was the vocations director in my diocese. And what was very, very clear is people had a very limited understanding of the word vocation. If you talked about vocation, people would think it's about being a priest or a religious sister or brother. And so when I used to go to the parishes and talk about vocations, people would start by just really thinking, well, I haven't got a vocation to be a priest, so really it's not relevant for me. So what is a vocation? Well, the word means to call, to be called. And we commonly misunderstand that this call is just about following God in a certain way, particularly priest or religious. But my vocation is linked to my very existence. The first part of my vocation is that I was called into existence. How do I know I have a vocation? Well, because I'm here. I'm on earth. I'm walking around. So the first experience of my vocation is that I am created. God calls me by my name. And the first thought of God, of me, is when I came into existence. So the first aspect of anyone's vocation is being created by God. The next part of that vocation is to help us to understand that we belong in the world in which God has created us to be. That we're not just some floating idea in the universe, that we're rooted, that we belong. We are part of something that can only be understood because it's bigger than ourselves. I am not the beginning and the end of my life. To find out about my life, to find my vocation, I have to see the bigger picture. God has called me into existence. So what's my vocation? Well, I don't have a vocation to be a priest. Now, I don't want you to be worried about this. I'm not going through a crisis. I don't have a vocation to be a priest. My vocation is the same as yours. My vocation is to do the will of God. It's to do God's will. That's how I ended up going to the seminary. That's how I ended up, after 6 years, being ordained. And that's why all these years after my ordination, I'm still a priest. Because in my life, I have sought to do God's will. And in the midst of that, I discover a particular path that the Lord wants me to follow. It's to do the will of God. Thy will be done. Now, the great Saint St. Ignatius, in his spiritual exercises, he talks about discernment. It's about that understanding when we open ourselves to God, where God may be leading us. And there are two types of discernment. There is a discernment towards a state of life. So when you undertake the spiritual exercises, it may well be at a particular moment in your life where you're going to make a decision for profession, for ordination, for marriage. They are there to help us about a particular state of life. Or it may be a moment in our life where we wish to bring together resolutions to express an ongoing reform or transformation of our life in relation to my current state, what I am at the moment. So it can be I'm making a lifelong commitment, a state of life, or it can be a moment where we make a resolution to express a need to change, a transformation in my present state of life. And this involves always a conversion. A conversion is to find God's will as I discern my state of life. But this conversion is by no means the only or the deepest or the most radical way to change my life. My conversion is a process. It's a process that goes on through life, but it's a conversion towards something. It's a conversion that helps me see clearer. It's a conversion of heart that helps me to see where God is leading me, helps me to understand the significance of God's will in the particular circumstances that I find myself. God's will is not some sort of abstract term. God's will is rooted in where I am at this moment, because the will of God is given to me as a gift, and the ability to discern God's will is God's grace. All these things are gifts, but they start right at the beginning, that I am called into existence by God. I have called you by your name. You are mine. Conversion, or even the state of life, being a priest or married or religious, is actually coming around to see that my life, through being a priest, through being married, through being dedicated as a single person, leads me to discover the greater reality, and that is, what was I created for? What is my particular vocation? And as we talk about discernment, it is to discern what the unique and unrepeatable name by which I am called is all about. When I am called by my truest and deepest self, my personal vocation, whereby I become aware in growing freedom of God's plan and design for my life. You see, I can look at all these various things. I can say I'm discerning I'm going to do this, and I'm discerning I'm going to do that. The biggest discernment is what is God's will. What is this unique name? And this vocation is not a vocation to the priesthood or the religious life. It's a vocation that is personal, because in this personal vocation, I am beginning with understanding the uniqueness of who I am. And from that uniqueness, I begin to discover God's will in my life. So even more radically than the question, what do I do? It is the question, who am I? What was I created for? The French author Flaubert, when he learned that a friend of his wanted to put his name forward for the prestigious French Academy, he wrote, "Why would you want to be something when you can be someone? Why would you want to be something when you can be someone?" We all want to be something in life, but what God calls us to be is someone in life. And it is that personal nature, that framework of who we are, that is the great discovery of our life and the meaning of our vocation. So our personal vocation is our unique God-given meaning in life. The unique God-given meaning in life. Now we know that we have materially, we are unique. Our fingerprints are unique. Our DNA is unique. In one of my parishes, one of my parishioners was a very prolific burglar. And he, on one occasion, whenever he would end up in the police station, I was his phone call. He'd phone me up. And on one day, he was really, really angry. He said, I don't know how it happened, Father. I said, what's happened? He said, I've just been arrested. I said, well, I've got a pretty good idea why it happened. He said, no. I know I was up to no good. He said, but I can't work out how it happened because when I broke in, I had my gloves on. There was no way they could get my fingerprints. And what had happened was this. Yeah, he'd had his gloves on, so there were no fingerprints. But he thought he heard a noise inside this factory. So he put his ear against the glass and listened, and there was nobody there. And he broke in, and that was the end of it. Anyway, when he was arrested, of course, they took his fingerprints, but there were no fingerprints there. But then he took his ear print on this big ink pad, and it was his ears that gave him away. Why? Because they're unique. My handprints are unique. My fingerprints are unique. I am unique. I'm a one-off. Well, if I am unique in terms of my material reality, my DNA and my prints and my ear prints, then I am unique in my spiritual reality as well. Because my vocation are my spiritual fingerprints. My vocation is my spiritual DNA. There is something unique about my relationship with God that has never happened before and will never happen again. God has created me for some definite service. He has committed some work to me that he has committed to no other. Newman's prayer. So our personal vocation is a very important element because it tells us about who I am in relationship to God and his Son, Jesus Christ. Through that name, we find the true meaning of our life. Now, I want to recommend to you a remarkable book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's written by a chap called Viktor Frankl. Now, Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist who worked in Vienna and was arrested. He was Jewish before the war and sent to Auschwitz, where he worked and survived. And at the end of the war, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning. And it's in two parts. The first part is called Experiences in a Concentration Camp, and the second part is his theory called logotherapy, the therapy of the word, the therapy of meaning, how to understand what's going on in my life, how do I find meaning in what's going on in my life. And he tells the story when he was at Auschwitz. Obviously he was a doctor, and he tells the story of how he would speak to people. And he would say, people died in two ways. They died because they were killed, and that's how the majority died. He said, but so many died because they just gave up. Every morning they would go into the huts and just bring out the people who just died during the night. They had lost any will to carry on, and who could blame them? And he would from time to time speak to people and say, tell me who you are. And most of them would roll up their sleeve and point to the number that had been tattooed on their arm. And he would say to them, but is that all there is to you? And many would say, well, what else can they be? A prisoner in a prison camp. What else can there be? And he would persist. And he tells one story where he's talking to this man and he goes through this, I'm a prisoner in Auschwitz, what else can I be? And he said, but is that all there is to you? And he said, well, I used to be the leader of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. You see, we all have problems. We all have things that in some way define us. But that can't be the whole story of who we are. In the midst of our struggles, that's what's happening to us, yes. But is it who we are? Is that the uniqueness of who we are? It may be the struggles we have at the moment, but is it who we are? He writes this: "We who lived in the camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. In the final analysis, it became clear that the sort of person the prisoner became was the result of an inner decision and not the result of camp influences only. They may have been few in number, but these acts of kindness are sufficient proof that everything can be taken away from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's way. And there were always choices to be made. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit yourself to those powers which threaten to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstances, renouncing freedom and integrity to become moulded into the form of the typical inmate. There were always choices to be made, and there are always choices to be made, whether in those appalling circumstances, to discover the true meaning of our life. Who are you? Who am I? As I've said it in some of the talks, when you go to an AA meeting, you start with your name, not with your problem. My name's John. My name's Mary, Fred, and I'm an alcoholic. The alcoholism is what's the problem. John, Mary, Fred is the true person. And it's within that person that whatever the issue that we face, it's within the strength, within the personal relationship to God, that everything lies to find this bigger picture. So the personal vocation is in fact the secret of unity and integration at the heart of our whole life, precisely because it's the unique God-given meaning in our life. The personal vocation, the deepest secret of unity and integration in my heart, because it's what God has created me to be. I have a unique relationship with the Father through his Son, Jesus Christ. And you could call this unique relationship our own personal salvation history. We know about salvation history, but salvation history is not just a book, it's a story of a people. It's that when we read the scriptures, what we're reading is not a sort of book of philosophy, we're reading a book of people. It's about salvation history. And salvation history is individual history. My personal vocation is my own particular unique relationship with Jesus Christ. There is one God, and there is one mediator between God and man, the man Jesus Christ. And that means that the facet of the personality of Jesus Christ is proper to each one of us. So that's why we talk about my Jesus, my God, because that relationship is unique. It's my spiritual DNA. Nobody else has got that story. I could stand here for hours and bore you with my whole story. But when I look at it, it's my story, it's my salvation history. It's what brings me to this moment. And I look at all the ups and the downs. I could write my own book of the Bible with plenty of lurid descriptions and more most remarkable graces. It's my history. It's my salvation history. And it's how God walks with me in my life. And for it to lead to salvation, I need to recognize the uniqueness of who I am. We need, in the Christian life, to be conformed into God's image and likeness. It is no longer I that live, but Christ that lives in me. And so we hear that God says, I have called you by your name. So let's just think for a moment what that name might be. Well, if we think about Jesus for a moment, okay, what would his unique name be? Well, we know it was Jesus Christ, and the Christ certainly was unique. But what was his name? The name, remember, isn't just Fred or George or Jesus or John. The name has a meaning insofar as it represents a personal link between me and my Saviour, between me and my God. So what's Jesus' unique name? Just for a moment, think. What do you think Jesus' unique name is? That when he announced this name, people were shocked. They were surprised. Well, the name that he had, which showed his unique relationship to his Father, of course, was the word Abba. Abba. So when he described God, when he used the term Abba, people thought, you can't speak to God like that. Well, he could. He could. Because it was his unique relationship. He was the one who could call God Abba. So when we try to discern our personal vocation, what we're kind of looking at is for something unique in our life. Some moment in our life. It may be a crossroads. It may be a moment of great rejoicing. It may be a moment of profound suffering. But at that moment, even just for a glimpse, the reality of God was shown in that experience. Now, I'm going to tell you my name. And when I say it, you're going to say, oh, is that it? Well, yeah, it is it. And it's this. It's a very simple name. It's actually not just a name. It's a description. But for me, it's my unique relationship with Jesus. It's not a unique name, but it's unique to me, to my story. And this is it. It's Sacred Heart of Jesus, I place my trust in you. Well, you might think, well, that's a bit of a funny name. Well, it may be an unusual name, and it's not a name that I go around using, but for me, it names my relationship with God. When God created me, that's what he saw. He saw that there would be a moment of absolute trust in my life that would define my relationship with God. Now, how did that come about? Well, without going too deep into the story, I had a horrible letter. It was a frightening letter, and I didn't know what to do. So I went straight into the church, I knelt in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I placed the letter on the ledge in front of the tabernacle, and I said, Lord, I trust you. I don't know what to do. Sacred Heart of Jesus, I place my trust in you. Now, where did that come from? Well, I'd been saying that prayer since I was a child, because outside of my classroom, where I went to school in St Helens in Canning Town, there was a great big statue of the Sacred Heart with his arms outstretched. And each day we would say, Sacred Heart of Jesus, I place my trust in you. And I've said it millions of times. But at that moment, I understood what it meant. At that moment in time, at that unique moment, at that frightening moment in my life, I understood what Sacred Heart of Jesus, I place my trust in you meant. And it has shown me in a way that is particular to me, that is personal to me, what this unique relationship to God is. And so I ask you to, this evening, take time before our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament and try and think, what is your name? I have called you by your name, yes, and you are mine. There is a name known to God and to you. And the meaning of your life is the discernment of that name. It may not be George Smith. Well, it won't be George Smith. Apologies to any George Smith. But it will be a word that will describe who you are. And it will be the word that God has given you. And in that description from God, you will begin to understand your true vocation, your personal vocation, that nobody else has had before, and that there is a uniqueness. And I think that for so many people in their life, this is the missing link. It's the missing link. That we can have a job, we can have a particular vocation, we can have a framework, but there's always something missing. Something missing. And it is the personal nature of our relationship with Jesus Christ. Our personal vocation. So what's your name? Reflect on that this evening. And don't try too hard. And if you can't come up with something tonight, it's not that you have to come up with something. Something may come to you straight away. The name may well be just an event, which it was for me. But it will be something there. Ask for the grace of God to understand, because that moment, that grace, that name will tell you who you are and show you who God has created you to be. In the finding of that name, you will find meaning in your life, meaning in the midst of suffering, meaning to celebrate with wonderful joy, because this is your personal vocation, your response to the will of God in your life. I'd like to end by reading a poem by T.S. Eliot, and it's about names, and it's called The Naming of Cats. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. First of all, there's the name that the family use daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo or James, such as Victor or Jonathan, George or Bill Bailey, all of them sensible everyday names. There are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter, some for the gentlemen, some for the dames, such as Plato, Admetus, Electra, Demeter, but all of them sensible everyday names. But I tell you, a cat needs a name that's particular, a name that's peculiar and more dignified. Else how can he keep up his tail perpendicular, or spread out his whiskers, or cherish his pride? Of names of this kind I will give you a quorum, such as Monkerstrap, Quoxo or Coricabat, such as Bombularina or else Gellialorum, names that never belong to more than one cat. But above and beyond, there's still one name left over, and that is the name you will never guess, the name that no human researcher can discover, but the cat himself knows and will never confess. When you notice a cat in profound meditation, the reason I tell you is always the same. His mind is engaged in a rapt contemplation of the thought of his name, His ineffable, effable, ephine effable, deep and inscrutable, singular name. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.